The first murder case I ever worked was on Europa Station. I was young, although I didn't think so back then. Just out of college, barely 3 weeks since I made detective. They paired me with a fat old Bulgarian who was supposed to show me the ropes but spent most of his time sipping from the flask he hardly bothered hiding, and watching the calendar tick down towards retirement. So I was mostly on my own, and cocky enough to think that was a good thing. Europa Station was a hard place in those days, back before the war, I mean. Before the military started dumping freighter loads of money into it, it was just miners and the things miners like. Bars, casinos, and whorehouses. The whole place was one big red light district, literally, with the constant glare of Jupiter coming through the glass domes. The body was in the Kevolite district. There were plenty of alien communities on Europa Station. Lorians came to try out the waters of the moon below us. They like the cold and the dark. It reminds them of home. The Tark came for the same reason as the few human tourists we got, to ride the ice on Europa's surface, on sledges and skis and even luges, the most extreme winter sports destination in the solar system. Fedrans, Gotarni, and Hauskers all came to trade and maybe to try their luck at the casinos. They were all right. But the Kevolites, they came just to cause trouble as far as I could see. So it didn't surprise me when I got the call. There were more murders in the Kevolite district than all the others combined. Bogdan, my partner, he was still sleeping it off, so I went alone, by which I mean I was the only detective. I took 2 patrolmen with me, and there were 4 more waiting for us at the scene. Humans didn't go into the warren of corridors the Kevolites had decided were theirs unless they were well armed and had backup. There was a crowd of Kevolites hanging around. Their basic body plan is humanoid, but with slightly longer legs. Digitigrade makes it look like they have backwards-facing knees, red-orange skin, a stubby snout, and long, pointed ears. They look mean, and that's not just because they have teeth like an alligator. They like to fight, and they're always looking for an excuse. A couple of the larger males eyeballed me as I shoved through them to get to the body, but I made sure they could see I was armed. They'd know who the killer was, of course, but they'd never say anything. Victim was a typical adult male Kevolite, average height, that is, half a foot taller than me, and average build. At a glance it looked like he'd been stabbed, which is the favorite method for settling clan disputes. When it's personal, they use their teeth, and when it's not, well, Kevolite mercenaries will use any weapon they can get. Guns were officially banned, but a professional could get hold of one if he needed to, so this probably wasn't a contract hit. The victim, or his clan, must have offended someone who felt they had to send a message. That was the first thing that ran through my mind as I knelt down to examine the body. The 6 beat cops started pushing the crowd back, and it was only when I looked up again that I saw there was still one Kevolite in the space that had been cleared. A young one. They develop faster than us, so he was probably around 5 years old in absolute terms, but in human terms, he might have been the equivalent of 10 or thereabouts. "Hey, is he here for a reason?" I called out. "It's the Vix kid, witness." They'd just left him there, standing next to his father's body. Most people wouldn't think about a Kevolite's feelings because they pretend they don't have any. Very macho. But I could see the kid was shaking, and I was a little shocked the other cops had just ignored him. Like I said, I was still wet behind the ears, and even with Bogdan's shining example to learn from, I still had a slightly rose-tinted view of my fellow officers. Didn't take me long to get the lay of the land, but right then I couldn't understand why none of them seemed to care or even notice. I'd become a lot harder as time went by, but over all the years since then, I've always tried to make sure I never got as jaded as them. I took the boy out of the corridor, back into the workshop apartment that must have been their home. I put my arm around him, half expecting him to try and bite it off, but he didn't resist. After a moment or two, his glazed eyes started to come back into focus on the here and now. "What's your name, kid?" "Zach." When they spoke to a human, they usually barked and snarled, but he had such a small voice. "Is that your dad out there?" "Yeah." "What's his name?" "Mazak." "Right. Kevolites don't use surnames, but when they have a child, they give them the name they were born with and add another syllable to their own name, and another when they became a grandparent, and so on. Parenthood is important to them, Birthdays are a celebration for both parent and child. They understand, maybe better than us, how becoming a parent changes you. In the bear pit of Kevalite clan life, the father-son bond was the only unbreakable constant. Zach had just lost the one person in the universe he could count on. Suddenly, I wanted to do more than just clear the case. I wanted to fix this. Somehow. If I hadn't been young and stupid, I'd have known that nothing can fix a loss like that. But I wanted to try anyway, and making whoever done it pay seemed like a good start. "Did you see what happened?" I asked, gently as I could. "Yeah, they stabbed my dad." "You saw who did it? You recognized them?" "Yeah, can't tell you though." "Don't you want to see them punished?" "Yeah, but I'm not supposed to talk to you," Dad said. I was about to say he'd make an exception in this case, but he probably wouldn't have. He was a Kevalite, and what happened between them was no one else's business. So instead, I just said, "Your dad's dead, kid." "Yeah, that means you decide whether you want to see whoever killed him go down for it." "Yeah, still can't though. They'll kill me too." He said it so matter-of-factly, like it was an everyday thing. And for him it was, I suppose, bodies turning up in Kevalite town because someone had opened their mouth to the wrong person was a common occurrence. I looked him square in the eyes and said firmly, "No, they won't. I'll protect you." He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, eyeing me up and down, assessing me. Then he did that ear flick they do instead of shaking their head. "No, you won't. You're just a human. You lot don't care about us." I could have tried lying and said that the rights of Kevalites had always been a cause dear to my heart, but I had a feeling the kid would be able to tell. It was uncanny, the way he seemed to see right through me. So instead I just told the truth. "I care about you." He looked at me again. Who the hell knows what he saw in me, but he said, "Yeah, maybe, but you can't protect me. Kid, I promise you, anyone who wants to get to you will have to come through me." And because I wasn't quite that cocky, I added, "And the rest of ESPD as well. They're strong. You're not. They'd kill you and then they'd kill me." "How do you know I'm not strong?" "You're too nice." He said it with the certainty of someone saying that fire is hot and space is big, because that was how things worked in his world. The strong did what they wanted, and the weak suffered what they had to. If I wasn't bullying him and threatening him to tell me what I wanted, it was because I wasn't tough enough. Kevalites were loyal to their family, tolerated their clan, and everyone else was a target. I wasn't family or clan, so he literally couldn't understand why I was being nice to him. "Zach, just give me a chance. You have to give me a chance, because if you don't talk to me, then whoever did this to your dad is going to get away with it." He snarled, showing his large, sharp teeth. It was the first sign of emotion he'd shown. "I'll kill them. When I'm older. When I'm stronger. By the time you're old enough to do anything, they'll be long gone." Society was fluid on Europa. People came and went like money at the blackjack tables. By the time Zach was fully grown, the perps could be halfway across the galaxy. "Besides, your dad tried to stand up to them, yeah? You think you'll be stronger than your dad?" Zach was silent for a moment, and I knew Kevalites well enough to know that he was torn between the Kevalite determination to be stronger than everyone, one day, and the fact that every Kevalite child wanted to grow into their father. "Just come with me back to the station," I coaxed him. "You'll have to come at some point for your dad. He'll be there, and there'll be paperwork and stuff you have to sign." "Why?" His ears flattened, a sign of anger. "I'm his son. He should stay with me." "That's what happens when there's a murder," I explained gently. "Victim gets taken to the morgue so the medical examiner can have a look at them. Then the family has to come and tell us what they want done with the bod, with their relative. Fill out all the forms for that, and then confirm their ID, 'cause we can't just take someone's word they are who they say they are." Zach dipped his head, agreeing. He understood suspicion and mistrust at least. "I'll help you with all that. And if you don't want to say anything about what happened, then no one's going to make you. But while you're at the police station, take a look around. Maybe you'll decide we aren't so weak after all." Wordlessly, he took my hand. I made sure the beat cops had cleared everyone out of the corridors around the workshop before I took him out. I took him straight back to the sector police station. There was no point in sticking around at the crime scene. The canvas would come up with squat, as always, and unless the killers had left a note saying, "I did it," signed X Forensics wasn't likely to turn up anything. It was a simple stabbing in a public place. If the murder weapon had been dropped, we'd have found it already. And it didn't look like the victim had had a chance to fight back. We'd pick up the DNA of 1,000 Kevalites who'd come to the workshop on business, and that would be all. Bogdan was awake when I got back, grumpy that I'd left him behind but already drinking again. I suggested he go off and look through the files the organized crime unit had on the Kevalite clans, maybe find out who the victim's clan had a beef with. I knew the answer was likely to be everyone, but it kept him busy, which was what I wanted, and it would mean hours sitting at a desk alone with no strenuous activity and no having to hide his hip flask, which was what Bogdan wanted. I sat with Zach. We had to wait until the coroner's people brought his dad in, and although there were other things I could be doing, none of them seemed more important. First, I talked him through the paperwork he'd have to sign. Then we just chatted for a while. Not even about the case, just about life. I told him how I'd ended up on Europa Station. Long story, don't ask. Then he told me about how his father brought him here when he was just a few months old, because their clan was opening a salvage and repair business. I told him about how I wanted to join the police because my dad was a cop. At first, his answers were as terse as they'd been at the crime scene. But after a while, he began to really talk to me. What it was like helping his dad with the business, the other kids in his neighborhood, who he was friends with and who his enemies were. Even Kevalite children had a long list of alliances and grudges. But I noticed that the children he hung out with and the children he hated didn't seem to line up with the clan relationships. The way he talked about it made it seem like the adults had their politics, and the children had theirs, and neither were much interested in the others. Explained why clan feuds were so fluid, as soon as a new generation grew up, which happened fast with Kevalites. A whole new set of friendships and hatreds came into play. It gave me hope that one day there could be a generation that didn't feel the need to carry on its forebears' brutal way of life at all. Like I said, I was young and naive. We were sitting there for hours. After a while, he was too exhausted to do much talking, and leaned against my arm while I went on and on about nothing very much. Then, just when I was sure he had finally dozed off, he turned his head and whispered in my ear, "Razave, Zave, Tashek." 3 names. I didn't have to ask him who they were. The arrests happened that evening. I would have liked to be there, but a lot of Kevalites had seen me at the workshop, and I wanted to keep them guessing over what the charges were until we filed them. There were probably several dozen things clan boss Razave, his son, and his underboss could have been arrested for. Besides, I had to stay with Zach. He didn't want to leave my side, and I didn't want to leave him. I'd sworn I was going to protect him, and if I couldn't keep that promise to the kid, then I didn't deserve to hold a badge, even one as grimy as ESPD. Europa Station Police Department did not, you probably won't be surprised to learn, have a well-developed witness protection program. A human we could have kept safe simply by sending them back to Earth, or one of the many other shitholes the solar system has to offer. But a Kevalite will stand out wherever you send them, and we wouldn't have been able to find anyone who wanted to take him in anyway. They're not exactly popular. Couldn't give him back to his own clan either. They'd take him, out of duty to their fallen clan brother. But in that situation, the kid gets treated like an unwanted stepchild at the best of times, and they weren't happy that he'd talked to the cops. Blood for blood, they understood. A retaliatory attack had certainly already been in the works, although most likely against some poor schmuck a lot lower down the hierarchy than the actual perpetrators. But bringing the cops down on the clan leader was tantamount to a nuclear strike, and Razave's clan would make Zach's clan pay the price for that. In my naivety, I'd considered none of that when I got him to talk to me. Not that I ever regretted it. To this very day. The Kevalites shouldn't have come to our system if they didn't like playing by our rules, and around here when one person murders another, they get dragged out of their home in handcuffs and put behind bars. No exceptions. But that still left the problem of what to do with Zach. No witness protection program, not for this penny ante kind of case at least. My bosses wanted to just dump him on social services like any other kid, but there was no way they'd find a placement for a Kevolite even if they could keep him safe, which they couldn't. The guys who arrested the perps found the murder weapon right there in the room with them, just sitting on a table. The arrogant bastards had been so sure no one would get the cops involved, they hadn't even bothered to get rid of the knife. Maybe it had sentimental value. I wouldn't put it past a Kevolite. There were flecks of barely dried blood on it, and it even had Razavay's fingerprints. Open and shut case on him, at least. Xavi and Tashek might have walked if Xavi hadn't gone off on a rant, outraged that we dared to arrest him. Son of a clan boss, he inherited the sense of entitlement that came with the position, but not the brains that got Daddy where he was. Poor Tashek. He knew how to play the game and keep his mouth shut, but Zava's tirade managed to implicate both of them, which was good for Zach because it meant he didn't have to testify in court. But it was bad for him too because my bosses and the prosecutor didn't need him to make their case, and therefore weren't too concerned what happened to him. Don't get me wrong, they weren't bad people, but trying to keep crime down on Europa Station was like trying to empty the ocean with a sieve, and everyone had a long list of other problems they had to deal with before they could spare a thought for a Kevolite kid, even one who'd risked his neck for us. Just give him back to his clan was the general opinion. After all, he might live. After some frustrating conversations, bouncing from office to office and carrying a sleeping Zach around the building with me, I finally realized there was only one way I was going to keep him alive. I had to get him out of the solar system. Fortunately, our computers had files on every Kevolite immigrant, and when I started looking up his relatives, I found he had a grandfather back on Keval. His father's father, Kimazak. He was sure to take him in. Problem solved, right? Not quite. There was still the time it would take a message to get to Kimazak, and then the time it would take him to get to Europa Station. A week at least, probably more. So I took him home with me. It seemed like the quickest and easiest solution. 3 weeks on the job, and already I was learning that sometimes you had to step around the letter of the rules in order to stick to their spirit. That first night, I dropped Zach on my bed, then locked the door and piled up every scrap of furniture I had in front of it before falling asleep on the couch. I woke up with Zach looking at me and almost shot him. It was only then I realized I had my sidearm in my hand, newest model Gauss pistol, capable of magnetically accelerating a 9mm round through 3 centimeters of steel. He looked at it, staring down the barrel, and then at me. He nodded approvingly.